All right, hi everyone. Today I'm talking about the Mendelian Genetics online lab. There's two parts to it. First, I'm going to do a brief review of the relevant material, which is punnett squares, genotypes, and phenotypes, and then I'm going to talk briefly about the chi-squared test, which you'll use in part two. If you want to skip all of this and go straight to the lab, here's how you do that. First, you're going to open up Canvas. You go to Modules. You're going to scroll down to where it says quizzes and exams, and there's two parts. There's two quizzes, one for part one and one for part two. Click on part one, read the instructions. Here's how you get the handout. You click right there. I've already gotten the handout. Oh, it says resume quiz because I already started it. But yours will say start quiz or take quiz or something like that. So what you'll do is using the information in this handout, you will answer all the questions in the quiz for part one. You have to read everything. Okay, and then after that, you close part one quiz and you're going to do part two. Quizzes are not timed, so don't worry about that. I want to tell you one thing though, which is that on page 4, this part right here, this little blank, that is going to be your answer to question number 6 in the quiz for part 1. So that's the value that you put in that little blank there. And when you're doing number 2, you open up quiz number 2, obviously, and then you answer the questions in there. All right, so let's go ahead and do the review. All right, to start off, the objectives are to recognize dominant and recessive alleles, to distinguish genotypes from phenotypes, to construct punnett squares to predict outcomes of a monohybrid and dihybrid cross, and to analyze data with a statistical test. Come back here. Where did you go? All right, it's very important to read sections 9.3 through 9.5 and 9.7 in your textbook before completing the lab. If you don't have the textbook, that will be okay. But it is better to read it if you have the textbook. The lab is broken into 2 submission documents. Complete part 1 and submit. Part 1 will then be automatically graded. Review the answers and provided feedback before moving on to part 2. Go down here. This laboratory exercise is designed to demonstrate the patterns and basic processes of simple Mendelian genetics. Mendelian laws of inheritance, which are that alleles separate during meiosis, during gamete formation. They separate independently of one another. There's a dominant allele and a recessive allele. The dominant allele is the one you see, and the recessive allele is the one you don't see if there's a dominant present. Those are just some of the Mendelian laws of inheritance. We talked about those in class before. Mendelian laws of inheritance will be studied using the results of genetic crosses in corn. The chi-square test for goodness of fit will be used to introduce a simple technique for statistical analysis. Ears of Indian corn will be used for this lab. Each kernel of corn is the result of a fertilized embryo. Therefore, each corn kernel is an individual offspring that can grow into a corn plant. Also, let's just stop and think about how many pollen grains, essentially plant sperm, it takes to make one corn on the cob. That's a lot. Like, it's not just like one sperm and one egg come together and make an entire cob of corn. It's a ton. Kind of freaky, actually. Anyway, back to this. Back notes. Okay, so alleles are represented by letters. And remember, alleles are alternate forms of a gene. Capital letter is going to represent a dominant trait, and a lowercase letter is going to represent a recessive trait. Remember, the dominant trait is the one that you will see if it is present. All right, for the example, we're going to use this as Trogdor, the Burninator. If you have never heard of Trogdor, the Burninator, I highly suggest you go to YouTube and search for Trogdor and then click on strong bad email number 58. Drag. It's really funny. But if you don't want to do that, here's just a picture of the trogdor. We're going to use the letter, we're going to use a trait example of wings. And W for wings, W is not a very good letter to use because it is the same, it looks the same in uppercase and lowercase. So we're not going to do that. Let's just use Q. So Q, big Q is going to be for big wings, and that's going to be dominant. And little q is going to be for small wings, and that one is the recessive trait. Each trogdor has 2 alleles for wings, one from each parent received at the moment of conception. Let's say that Mr. Trogdor, he has small wings. That's his phenotype, the physical expression of alleles. It's what we see. His genotype, make a little table here. Phenotype is small wings. His genotype is a combination of alleles. It tells you what combination of alleles they have. It's always going to be 2 letters. So because Mr. Trogdor is exhibiting the recessive phenotype, small wings, we know that he's going to have a recessive genotype. So he has small wings, and he's going to use the recessive alleles for his genotype, which are little q, little q. And this is called homozygous genotype. It's homozygous recessive, and homozygous means that the alleles are the same. They're either both dominant or both recessive. Let's talk about Mrs. Trogdor. So she's going to have big wings. That's her phenotype. And her genotype must have at least 1 dominant allele because she has the dominant phenotype here. So her genotype is going to have a dominant allele. What the second allele is, it could be dominant or recessive. It doesn't matter because we've already got 1 dominant allele here taking over everything. And it's going to express itself no matter what the other allele is. But just for fun, let's say that the other allele is recessive. This kind of genotype is called heterozygous. Heterozygous means the alleles are different. One of them is dominant and one of them is recessive. So what we want to know is what's the probability that baby trogdor is going to have small wings? Punnett square is what we do. It tells you all the possible combination of alleles for the offspring of 2 parents. Question we're answering, the probability that their child will have small wings. So we've got our little table over here, Mr. Trogdor and Mrs. Trogdor. If we want all possible combinations of alleles, which is what we're going to have from the Punnett square, first we've got to know what alleles each parent already has. Mr. Trogdor has, come on. So Mr. Trogdor has allele little q and also allele little q. So basically he just has, oh, come on. Oh, I don't know how it works. Okay. So that's the allele he can contribute to his children. Mrs. Trogdor, on the other hand, she has 2 different alleles. She has the large q, the dominant allele, and the small q, the recessive allele. So she could get either of those alleles to her little baby. So we're going to draw us a nice little Punnett square here. It's really difficult to draw without a touch screen, so kind of bear with my bad drawings. That'll, oh, crap, no, stop. Okay. So we're going to put the genotype, the alleles of Mrs. Trogdor. Let's put those up here on top. Big Q, little q. And then Mr. Trogdor will be on the side. Little q, little q. Looks horrible, but that's okay. And then to fill it out, we're going to take, so let's start with the big Q. It's on top of this column. So we're going to take it all the way down and write it in every square in this column. And then we're going to do the same with this allele. We're going to take it and write it in every square in this column that it is on top of. And with Mr. Trogdor's alleles, this one is next to this row. So we're going to take this allele and write it in every square on this row. And the same with this allele. We take it all the way across, write it in every square on that row. So in the end, it's going to look like this. And the genotypes that are in these squares tell us all the possible genotypes that a baby Trogdor could have. So our possible genotypes, it looks like, are going to be big Q, and little q, little q. So the chance of having a baby Trogdor from these particular parents, these two parents, having small wings is going to be 2 in 4. Because this one would have small wings because it has the recessive genotype, just like Mr. Trogdor. This one would have small wings as well. So that's 2 out of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's 50% chance. Now this is what's called a monohybrid cross, which is tracking the inheritance of one trait. We could also track the inheritance of 2 traits at once. And that's called a dihybrid cross. We're not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but I do want to point out a couple of things. So in addition to wing size, we're also going to look at a second trait, teeth. Let's let the dominant allele be big T for teeth, and the recessive allele, oh my gosh, okay, that is not okay, be little t, no teeth. So let's say that Mr. Trogdor, let's bring back our little table here. Oh my God, are you kidding me? The hell? Okay. So Mr. Trogdor, let's say that he has the genotype little q, big T, big T. So he's going to have the recessive phenotype for wings. He's going to have small wings. And he's going to have the dominant phenotype, which is teeth. My God, never ends. Which is teeth. So he has the dominant phenotype because he has the dominant genotype for teeth, and the recessive phenotype because he has the recessive genotype for wings. Right, so now Mrs. Trogdor, let's talk about her. She has the dominant phenotype. Oh, I have to do. Why do these things happen? Good Lord. All right, so she's going to have the dominant phenotype for wings because she has a dominant allele, which is a big Q. She's going to have the recessive phenotype for teeth because she has the recessive genotype, 2 little t's. So in the end, she's going to have large wings and no teeth. All right, so what about baby Trogdor? Let's say baby Trogdor has large wings and teeth. So what are all the possible genotypes? Well, let's go back to drawing here. All right, let's draw 4 blanks. 1, 2, 3, 4, because there's going to be 4 alleles, 2 from each parent. Large wings, that means there's at least 1 dominant allele for wings. Okay, there we go. Teeth, so there's at least 1 dominant allele for teeth. And here we are again with. All right, so the other allele we don't know for sure. It could be a dominant allele or it could be a recessive allele. The same for this one. It could be a dominant allele or a recessive allele. Here we go. The only things we know for certain are the dominant Q and the dominant T. So there's all these different possible phenotypes. Sorry, genotypes. We have big Q, big T, big T, big Q, little q. big T, little t.